Make it 15:15. Now, I've been asked to slow down because people are having difficulty hearing. I think it's partly when I go into these weird languages that makes it more confusing. I will try. If I'm going too fast, if I start galloping, just sort of make a little sign and I'll try and slow down. The other thing I should tell you, these lectures are being recorded, and on the playback you can slow down the speed as well, so that, if you don't mind me talking very deeply. Okay, so I will try. I'm going to also stand over here because it might help the acoustics a bit, so we'll see how it goes. Now, yesterday, the stories that we looked at were not part of the Táin proper, not even really part of the Ulster cycle. As I said, Scéile Mucha might be part of a Leinster cycle, and Bricrú's Feast rather focuses more on the King of Munster rather than the heroes of Ulster. For the rest of the week, we're going to be looking at stories that are part of the Ulster cycle proper, and as I said, they cluster around the great Cattle-Raid of the Táin Bó Cúailnge. But today, I want to look at some of the important sub-stories, the Rev Scéile, the stories that are prequels in the sense that they tell things that happened before the Táin and things that happened to people in the Táin, but also they answer questions that you might imagine an audience member having about the Táin. Some of the stories are in effect standalone tales that have just been linked onto the Táin for one reason or another. To give you an example, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, which is the Cattle-Raid of Cooley, which I think I mentioned yesterday, in that Uisliu and Maeve have decided to go to Ulster to raid on a cattle raid, and they need provisions. So what they do is they get hold of Froich, they promise him their daughter Finnebhar in return for him coming on the Táin and giving them lots of cattle. So basically Lobola. He's paying cattle to marry her. The rest of the story deals with the love between Froich and Finnebhar and the various obstacles placed in their path by the parents, who are only after the cattle and don't actually want him to marry their daughter. Finally, it tells how Froich wins the necessary cattle, because you're not going to pay your own cattle. You go and steal someone else's cattle and then pay it. Wins the necessary cattle, earns Finnebhar's hand and his place on the Táin. And the Táin itself, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, is not a necessary part of the story. All this can happen without there being any need for him to go off on another cattle raid. And it's probably a wooing tale, which is another genre of tales in Old Irish that's been tacked onto the larger cycle. This would makes a lot more sense because Uisliu and Maeve are so very obstructive that it really fits better with a classic wooing tale rather than a story where they're trying to get someone's help. And also, we have to bear in mind that these stories were being written down an indeterminate length of time after they were originally composed. They were not all composed at the same time, that they were only written down after the Christianization of Ireland, so that elements that would make sense in the original story may have been distorted or suppressed in a written version, and multiple versions of the story from different parts of the country might well be conflated or combined. Okay, now, the three stories that I want to look at today are more closely linked with the later events of the Táin, although in one case there's also a standalone tale that's been tacked on, I think. I've listed them in the order in which they come in Kinsella's translation of the Táin, which is what I'm using for quotations. But I'd like to look at them in a different order, in a slightly more chronological order, or, well, I can't even really talk chronological with Old Irish, but it makes sense to think of them as each responding to a question that somebody in the audience has asked. And usually that's a why or a how question. The question, why did they go on the Cattle-Raid of Cooley in the first place at all, that's going to be answered in the Táin proper, so we'll get to that on Thursday. But there's also the question of why were they after this particular bull? What was special about the bull of Cooley? The origins of not just the brown bull, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, which is the bull thereafter, but also the bull that sets it all off by refusing to be part of Nath's herd, the white bull, Finn Ben Achai, the white-horned bull of Ai, which is where Uisliu and Maeve have their capital. They take us into the realm of the mythological and the supernatural. They're not just ordinary bulls. In fact, they weren't even bulls to start with. They were pig keepers. You remember that pigs are very important to the Celts. They counted their wealth in cattle. A cow was the standard basic unit of wealth. You know, how much is something worth? It's worth half a cow, or it's worth 2 cows or 4 cows. And there's a gradation. It's like measuring things in football fields or weighing them in African elephants. You know, there's sort of these standard units of measurement. But although the cattle was their main wealth, pork was their preferred meat. And as my professor told us when I was studying Old Irish about 30 years ago, pigs are very mystical, you know. So these are mystical pigs. And not only are these particular pigs mystical, but these particular pig keepers are pig keepers not to human kings, but to the kings of the Sidhe. The Sidhe, S-I-D, plural S-I-D-E. In this case, it's the Sidhe of Connaught and Munster, not Connaught and Ulster. That comes later. Now, to understand the Sidhe, we have to go back a little bit further into early Irish mythology and the origin tales. The precursors to the Celts were, in the Irish legends at least, were the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the god whose mother is Danu. These were a magical race who had invaded Ireland earlier, fighting and intermarrying with the earlier inhabitants, the Fir Bolg, and finally defeating them. The Tuatha De Danann, in turn, were invaded by the Milesians, whom the Celts saw as their ancestors. Eventually, the two sides came to a settlement whereby the Milesians got everything above ground and the Tuatha De Danann everything below ground. They retreated into the Sidhe, the hollow hills or fairy mounds or fairy hills or elf mounds, or however you want to put them now. Have I got this thing on? Ah, yes, there we are. Okay. These also are these are all names applied to the prehistoric burial mounds, such as Newgrange here and Knowth. So these are built back in Neolithic times. They're older than Stonehenge. The roof still doesn't leak, so very good building back in prehistoric Ireland. And they're burial chambers, so they are hollow, and they were seen as dwelling places of these otherworldly beings. And the world of the Sidhe operates on a different plane to that of the ordinary mortals, although the two can interact. Freud, whom I just mentioned a little bit earlier, had a mother who was of the Sidhe, and so when he dies, he's taken back into the fairy hills. And just as each province has its human king with his stronghold and his warriors, so each has its Sidhe with its own king and court. Now, in the story of how the bulls were begotten, the Sidhe involved, as I said, are not Ulster and Connaught, as you might expect, but Munster and Connaught. Munster was, you'll remember, particularly associated with magic. The pig keepers, being by association mystical, were also shapeshifters. Their names Frioch, bristle, and Rioch, grunt, also suggest that they are some way the embodiment of the qualities of the essential pig. And initially, all is well. They're friends, they graze their pigs together. You know, one goes north when the mast is good up there, and one comes south when the food is better in the south. They only become competitive when others interfere. In other words, when it becomes a tribal competition. The people of Connaught and Munster each claim that their pig keeper is more powerful. And when the Munster pig keeper tells his friend about this, the matter becomes competitive. "Is it you?" he said. "They are trying to cause trouble between us. Men here say your power is greater than mine." "It is no less, anyway," Auchil's pig keeper said. "That's something we can test," Baldwin's pig keeper said. As with the champions portion, once the claim of supremacy has been made, it has to be challenged, defended, and proven. They do this through changing shape. First a year as birds of prey, then 2 years as water creatures battling in the river, then stags stealing each other's herds, then 2 warriors gashing each other, 2 phantoms terrifying each other, and 2 dragons pouring down snow on each other's lands. I can't quite figure out how these 2 phantoms are going to terrify each other. I mean, do they leap out behind doorways and go boo or something like that? You'd think, if you're a phantom, how scared are you going to be of the other one? But that's the way it's it. So the battles become elemental. Snow is now being involved. I don't know why dragons cause snow, but that's the way the story goes. And there's clearly no victor. They just keep fighting. Their final transformation is into maggots. They dropped down then out of the air and became 2 maggots. One of them got into the spring of the river Cron in Cúailnge, where a cow belonging to Dara Macfiachna drank it up. The other got into the wellspring Garrod in Connacht, where a cow belonging to Meth and Uisliu drank it. From them in this way sprang the 2 bulls. Finbenach, the white-horned of Iplain, and Duv, the dark bull of Cúailnge. The names of the pig keepers in these transformations show that they are symbolic rather than individuals. Bristle and Grunt as pigs, Talon and Wing as birds, Whale and Sea Beast as sea beasts, Point and Edge as warriors, Shadow and Shield as phantoms, and the untranslated Cruniuk and Tuniuk as names of 2 maggots. I don't know what the essential qualities of a maggot are, so nobody knows what the word means. Now, there's a yin-yang quality to their opposition. The final incarnation as bulls is also initially between white, thin, and black. Duv, the first name given to the bull of Cúailnge, means black or dark. The bull, however, is known as the Don Cúailnge even a few lines later, so very quickly becomes the brown bull. And Finbenach is white-horned, not white. So this is a relative rather than an absolute difference between the 2. So it's not a battle between good and evil, it's just a battle, just another fight. And what is worth noting here is that one of the pig keepers has shifted from Munster to Ulster. And now these are the 2 dominant provinces at the time of the Táin, and they are, like the pig keepers, involved in an ongoing dispute over which province is superior. Possession of both bulls would indicate clear superiority of one province over the other. The ultimate battle and death of both bulls at the end of the Táin, spoiler alert, maintains the balance between the provinces. Now, the next story that I want to look at answers the question, why did Coholan have to fight the whole invading army by himself? Because he's standing there, one man, against the united army of all of Ireland. And it makes him as a hero look good, but doesn't it make the rest of the Ullad look rather feeble, just sort of hiding back in Auanmacha and not coming out and fighting? And you might also wonder why, if there's only one man defending the border of Ulster, why the Connacht army just doesn't run right over him. And the reason that Coholan can defend the border all by himself has to do with the Celtic custom of preferring single combat where possible. 2 opposing groups would each put forth a champion, these would fight, and the rest would wait for the outcome before proceeding. It might still become a general melee, as we saw with Scalamukka, but not until the champions have fought. Anything else would involve loss of honour, and loss of honour is much, much worse than loss of life for a Celtic warrior. Now, the reason why Coholan has to defend the border by himself goes back to an earlier incident and involves a gesh, which is somewhat like a curse. Remember, gesh is sort of taboo, injunction, curse, whatever you like. Coholan is exempt from this because neither he nor his father, now he has, by the way, both an earthly and a supernatural father, neither of them are technically Ullad. Although his mother is. His mother is either Conchovor's sister or daughter. His home is in the borderland of Ulster, not in the province itself. Now, this story also has supernatural sort of fairy tale, folktale elements with the motif of the fairy wife, who only stays as long as her husband doesn't violate the one prohibition she puts on him. In this case, it is that he should not be boastful at the king's court. Don't, in other words, get involved in the kind of dispute that the pig keepers have been in, because it can escalate. Her husband, Cruniac mac Agnavan, goes to the fair at which the king's chariot wins a race. When the crowd claims that nothing could beat those horses, Cruniac counters that his wife is faster. He doesn't need to. He's been warned not to, but he does it anyway. And the challenge, once made, has to be settled, has to be proven. He's arrested. His wife, Macha, is sent for to prove his claim. Her plea that she's pregnant and actually in labor is not accepted. She still has to run this race. The crowd won't wait. Because of their lack of compassion, she predicts that a long-lasting evil will come out of this on the whole of Ulster. She wins the race, but she then goes into labor, gives birth to twins at the end of it, and dies as a result. The name Awan Macha, the twins of Macha, is thus explained. Awan Macha is the capital of Ulster, the site of Conchovor's stronghold, and it survives as Navan Fort, just outside Armagh. So there's Navan Fort. And they have excavated and found that there are remains of what seems to be a fairly large stronghold. So the tradition that there was a king's palace here is not entirely false. It's quite plausible, actually. In the throes of labour, Macha places a gesh on the Uisliu. As she gave birth, she screamed out that all who heard that scream would suffer from the same pangs for 5 days and 4 nights in their times of greatest difficulty. This affliction ever afterwards seized all the men of Ulster who were there that day, and 9 generations after them. 5 days and 4 nights, or 5 nights and 4 days, the pangs lasted. For 9 generations, any Ulsterman in those pangs had no more strength than a woman in the bed of labour. Only 3 classes of people were free from the pangs of Ulster: the young boys of Ulster, the women, and Coholan. Macha is clearly a supernatural figure, and may have been a horse goddess. The custom of male mimicking of birth pangs, or kuvad, may have originally been a festival honouring the goddess, or designed to ensure the fertility of the horses. Narratively, of course, it explains the absence of the Ulstermen without detracting from their heroism, although I must say they were absent for a lot longer than 5 days and 4 nights. This avoids any risk of the competitiveness shifting from being between provinces to between the Ulster heroes, as we've seen it do in Bricrew's Feast. Now, the final story that I want to look at today is the one that you're most likely to have encountered before, as it has been dramatised by both Yeats and Synge. This is the tragic story of Deirdre of the Sorrows, the Irish equivalent of Helen of Troy. But the question it answers is, why was Fergus mac Roich siding with the Connachta? In Deirdre's story, he's a minor character. If you're familiar with the story, you may not even remember him being there. But the story is attached to the Táin and possibly survives because of the causal link between the killing of the sons of Uisliu and Fergus's presence in the Connaught camp. So before I give you a synopsis of Deirdre's story, I need to explain who Fergus mac Roich is and why he is significant. Fergus mac Roich had been king of Ulster before Conchofor, but he was not Conchofor's father. When Conchofor was 7 years old, Fergus proposed to Conchofor's mother, Ness, who accepted him on condition that Fergus resign the kingship to Conchofor for 1 year, so that they can call his son the son of a king. Now, this would mean that Conchofor's sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons would all have a claim to the throne. So it's actually quite a good thing to have. Having got her way, Ness, who was quite politically astute, then embarked on a campaign of bribery and corruption, advising her son and his foster parents to steal everything from one half of the people and give it away to the other half. So state capture in the early days. Nothing new under the sun. When the year was up, the Uisliu decided that they would keep Conchofor as king, being rather offended that Fergus had bargained the kingship away in the first place. What Fergus sold, let it stay sold. What Conchofor bought, let it stay bought. Now, Fergus accepted this and remained at Conchofor's court as one of his closest advisors. He clearly felt no personal loss of honour in losing the kingship because it had been a fair bargain. And the sneakiness with bribery and corruption was all part of the acceptable game of Irish politics. Cheating isn't entirely wrong as long as you do it in an honourable way, apparently. But when he does come to feel personally dishonoured by Conchofor in the course of the events of the story of Deirdre and the sons of Uisliu, the fact that he was tricked out of the kingship comes to the surface again. So evidently it's something that he's not totally happy with. Okay, let's look at the story in more detail. Conchofor and his followers are feasting at the house of his Shanachie, or storyteller, Fedlamith MacDowell. Fedlamith's heavily pregnant wife is there, and as she crosses the threshold, and thresholds are always significant places in Old Irish literature, as she crosses it, the baby in her womb screams out so loudly that everyone hears it. Don't ask me how, this is literature. They ask Cathbad, the druid, to explain this. It's unusual and they want to know what's happening. He predicts that the child will grow up to be a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman in Ireland, who will be named Deirdre and will cause much evil. The exile of the 3 sons of Uisliu, the exile of Fergus, and the deaths of several named heroes, including Conchofor's son. Now, the others want the child killed. Let's avoid this, just get rid of the child, to prevent the tragedy that's been foretold. But Conchofor, having heard Cathbad's description of her beauty, decrees that she be raised in isolation and that he will marry her when she's grown up. So the ultimate trophy wife. And she does grow up to be the most beautiful woman in Ireland, as predicted. She's kept in a separate enclosure away from everyone except her foster parents and a woman named Levorcham. And Levorcham can't be excluded because she was a satirist. Satire had tremendous power in early Ireland. If someone satirized you, you would be publicly dishonoured to the extent that it was seen as an actual blemish on your face. So Zapiro would have huge power if he was in early Ireland. A request by a satirist can't be refused, because if you refuse it, they will satirize you. And they pose a serious threat to your honour. So you don't mess with satirists. You just do not mess with them. So one day, in true fairy tale fashion, Deirdre sees on the snow a raven drinking the blood of a calf that her father has just killed. And she wishes for a man with hair like the raven, cheeks like blood, and his body like snow. So this is Snow White, Irish style. And Levorcham tells her that this description fits Noisha, the son of Uisliu. So Deirdre promptly falls in love with him, as you do in a fairy tale. Noisha and his 2 brothers, Anna and Arden, are 3 of the greatest heroes of the Red Branch. They're noted for their beautiful singing, which causes all the cows to give more milk, so it has a practical application as well, and fills everyone with peace and music. Their prowess in war, they could hold out against the whole province of Ulster if they put their 3 backs together, and their skill in hunting, which becomes useful later on. Deirdre engineers a meeting with Noisha and effectively forces him to run off with her. While Noisha was out there alone, therefore, she slipped out quickly to him and made as though to pass him and not recognize him. "That is a fine heifer going by," he said. "As well it might," she said. "The heifers grow big where there are no bulls." "You have the bull of this province all to yourself," he said, "the king of Ulster." "Of the 2, she said, "I'd pick a game young bull like you." "You couldn't," he said. "There's Cathbad's prophecy." "Are you rejecting me?" "I am," he said. Then she rushed at him and caught the 2 ears of his head. "2 ears of shame and mockery," she said, "if you don't take me with you." "Woman, leave me alone," he said. "You will do it," she said, binding him. There are several things to note in this passage. This is clearly very much a cattle-based society, and bulls are important. Think about the society as a herd of cattle for a moment, with Conchofor as the dominant bull. We're told in an earlier episode that Conchofor has the right to the first night with any bride, and also that any Ulsterman who gave him a bed for the night gave him his wife as well to sleep with. But a dominant bull has to defend his herd against a game young bull like Noisha. Noisha's initial rejection of Deirdre is overcome by her threat of shame and mockery. Even his brothers, who recognize that evil will come of this, agree to help him because otherwise he would be shamed. So you commit a crime rather than be shamed. Incidentally, when Noisha says, "Woman, leave me alone," he may actually be saying, "Wife, let go of my ears." It can be read either way. The word "ban" means both woman and wife, and if Noisha uses it in the sense of wife, it may indicate that he accepts Deirdre's proposal. And also when she says, "You will do it," binding him, she may be putting him under gesh as well. So now he's stuck, he's obligated. Noisha and his brothers then take Deirdre, as well as 150 warriors, 150 women, and the same of hounds and menials, to leave Conchovor's court. We don't hear much about the women, warriors, hounds, etc. After this, and the party is reduced to just the 4 principal characters living in exile. And Noisha's brothers are effectively just extensions of Noisha himself. Pursued by the Ulleth, they cross over into Alba, that's Scotland, and when game becomes scarce, they take to cattle raiding, and then, in order to protect themselves from the people who object to having their cattle stolen, they become mercenaries to the King of Alva. This leads to problems as, despite their attempts to keep Deirdre hidden, she's seen by the king's steward, who reports to the king that she is fit for a king over the western world, and recommends killing Noisha to get her. The king refuses to do this. That would not be honourable, but he sends the steward every day to woo Deirdre on his behalf. That's not considered dishonourable. She reports all this to Noisha and his brothers and refuses all the king's offers, so she's honourable. The 3 sons of Uisliu are then put into all kinds of traps and dangerous battles to have them killed. Not quite dishonourable, but acceptable, but they survive. And finally, the decision is made to kill them outright, and Deirdre warns them that they must leave or die. Now, what happens next is interesting. They've taken refuge on an island in the sea, a territory that doesn't belong to either Ireland or Scotland, and they are now fugitives from someone else other than Conchofor. And this, when the news gets back to Ulster, means that it's no longer an internal dispute, but a potential shame situation for the entire province. So they left that night and reached an island in the sea. This news reached Ulster. Conchofor, everyone said, it would be shameful if the sons of Uisliu fell in enemy lands by the fault of a bad woman. Better to forgive and protect them, to save their lives and let them come home, than for enemies to lay them low. Let them come, Conchofor said. Send for them with guarantees of safety. It is fine, as far as the Ulleth are concerned, for Conchofor to want to kill the sons of Uisliu, but it reflects badly on Ulster as a whole if someone else does it. Putting the blame of it all on Deirdre functions as a way of saving face for all the men involved. Now, the guarantees of safety chosen show, however, that this offer of forgiveness is regarded by Noisha and his brothers as suspect. Their first choice is Fergus, who as an ex-king is of equal rank with Conchofor. The other 2 are also high-ranking, and all 3 would be pledged to protect the sons of Uisliu with their own lives. For Conchofor to break his word and in the process kill Fergus would in itself bring serious shame upon him. Conchofor attempts to get around this by playing on Fergus's geis that he never refuse an invitation to a feast. Noisha and his brothers have also made a vow, putting themselves under their own geis, as it were, that they will not eat or drink in Ireland until they've eaten Conchofor's food. In the conflict between his personal honour, not breaking his geis, and his role as guarantor of Conchofor's word, Fergus chooses his personal honour, just as the sons of Uisliu choose not breaking their own vow over their safety. This is in keeping with the individuality of Celtic warrior society. In an attempt to satisfy both his obligations, Fergus sends his son Fiacha to accompany the sons of Uisliu. But Fiacha doesn't have the same status as his father, and in the event he can only die trying to prevent Noisha's death. Conchofor does not attempt to kill Noisha and his brothers himself. That would also be dishonourable, but he arranges for Elgan mac Dúrthacht, a minor king who has been an enemy of Conchofor and who is there on a peace mission, to do the actual killing. And one can easily imagine that killing Noisha and his brothers is the price that Conchofor has set on the peace treaty. Conchofor himself is surrounded by hired soldiers because of his fear that the sons of Uisliu might try to counterattack, and the whole event is viewed by the women from the ramparts. Elgan crossed the green with his men. Fergus's son came and stood at Noisha's side. Elgan welcomed Noisha with the hard thrust of a great spear that broke his back. Fergus's son grasped Noisha in his 2 arms and pulled him down and threw himself across him, and Noisha was finished off through Fergus's son's body. Then the slaughter broke out all over the green, no one left except by spike of spear or slash of sword. Deirdre was brought over to Conchofor and stood beside him with her hands bound at her back. That Fergus has been disgraced by this betrayal is clear from both his reaction and Deirdre's later comment on his choice. In one of the two poetic laments in this version of the story, she complains that Fergus did an injury, bringing us over the great sea, how his deeds of valour shrank when he sold honour for a drink. When the news of the slaying is first brought to Fergus and the two other guarantors, they react strongly and instantly. Fergus was told of this, and Dubthach and Cormac. They came at once and did mighty deeds. Dubthach killed Manya, Conchovor's son. Fiachna, son of Conchovor's daughter Fedelum, was killed with a single thrust. Fergus killed Throthrain, Troglethan's son, and his brother. Conchofor was outraged, and on a day soon afterwards, battle was joined between them, and 300 among the men of Ulster fell. Before morning, Dubthach had massacred the girls of Ulster, and Fergus had burned Mounds. The pattern here is an initial attack which may be targeting members of Conchovor's family in retaliation for the death of Fergus's son. Fergus is not named as the actual killer of either Conchovor's son or grandson, probably because he, as Conchovor's stepfather, is in a familial relationship with them, which would make it unacceptable for him to kill them personally. Cormac, who's Conchovor's son, is in the same position, and it may be that the whole reason narratively for having Dubthach as one of the guarantors is that he can kill members of Conchovor's family without incurring the odium of kinslaughter. Note also that the number of named victims in this attack equals the number killed earlier, the 3 sons of Uisliu and Fergus's son Fiacha. At this stage, the violence does seem contained, but we are not left with any hope that it can be. Conchofor reacts with outrage rather than shame for his treacherous act. A formal battle is arranged on a day soon afterward. As this is an internal war, we don't know which side the 300 among the men of Ulster who fell were on. Possibly they represent the casualties from both sides, but the feeling that one gets is that Conchofor's side loses. Certainly Dubthach and Fergus are the only ones named as doing damage. Now you might think it's a bit hard on the girls of Ulster to be massacred when they had absolutely no control over Conchofor's actions, nor took any part in the killing or betrayal, other than watching from the ramparts. The simple fact is that the massacre of the girls, like the burning of Aon Macha, is symbolic property damage, which has the effect of diminishing Conchofor's honour. As I mentioned before, the basic unit of value in this society was the cow. 4 cows equaled 1 kumal, or female slave, and 4 female slaves equaled 1 chariot. All these are used as measures of value. And of course, the way to acquire wealth in whatever form is through raiding and small battles. By massacring the girls of Ulster, Dubthach is depriving Conchofor of wealth without profiting from it himself. This is a way of stressing that this is not about wealth, but about honour. Fergus's burning of Aon Macha is similarly symbolic. It is, after all, Conchofor's capital, his stronghold. By burning it, Fergus asserts his superiority over Conchofor. The next action of the 3 guarantors is the one that links the story to the Táin proper. They go to Connacht, to the court of Eilean and Maeve. Not that this was a home for Ulstermen, but that they knew these 2 would protect them. That is, they know that Eilean and Maeve have the power to protect them, as Conchofor is not sufficiently strong to take on the entire province of Connacht. They also know that Conchofor's actions have outraged Celtic social norms. They are in the right, and Eilean and Maeve would lose honour if they did not protect them. Finally, Eilean and Maeve will be motivated by self-interest. As Fergus and his companions, we are told that they numbered a full 3,000, will be a valuable addition to their fighting force. The narrator tells us that for 16 years they made sure that weeping and trembling never died away in Ulster. There was weeping and trembling at their hands every single night. Now this is a bit problematic, as Coholan at the time of the Táin is only 17, but we have episodes of his earlier life in which Fergus is a character. Indeed, he is one of Coholan's foster fathers. We shouldn't take the detail of the 16-year feud too seriously. The point of it is to stress the seriousness of their feud with Conchofor, to justify their presence on the Connacht side in the Táin, and also to show that Ulster is superior to Connacht all along, as it is only Ulstermen in exile who can pose a serious threat to Ulster. The final part of the story moves away from the connection to the Táin and the dishonour of Conchofor to the pure tragic grief of Deirdre for a year after her capture. We are told that in that time she never gave one smile, nor took enough food or sleep, nor lifted up her head from her knees. She is given 2 poetic laments in the story, in which she looks back on her life with Naoise and his brothers, preferring the simplicity of her life then to all the pomp and splendour of Conchofor's court. Conchobar, your king, may take delight in pipers and in trumpeters. I have known a sweeter thing, the three sons' triumphant song. Noisha's voice a wave road, a sweet sound to hear forever. Ardon's bright baritone, Anla the hunter's high tenor. To Conchobar, she is a trophy wife in the literal sense. From before she was born, he chose her because having the most beautiful woman in Ireland as his property would give him status over other men. From his perspective, he has taken her from Noisha, so she is now his. It is unusual to get her description of her emotional state. I don't sleep now, nor redden my fingernails. What have I to do with welcomes? The son of Indel will not come. I can't sleep, lying there half the night. These crowds, I am driven out of my mind. I can neither eat nor smile. The passages I have quoted all come from the first poem, which is, according to the text, a response to the musicians that Conchobar sends to cheer her up. His own attempts to console her meet with no better success. Conchobar, what are you thinking, you that piled up sorrow over woe? Truly, however long I live, I cannot spare you much love. The thing most dear to me in the world, the very thing I most loved, your harsh crime took from me. I will not see him till I die. Break my heart no more today. In a short while I'll be no more. Grief is heavier than the sea, if you were but wise, Conchobar. That's a lovely image, isn't it? Conchobar's reaction to this is not compassion, but irritation. Since he can't get her to react to him lovingly, he decides to punish her. Finding out from her that the two things she hates most in the world are himself and Ogan mac Dúrthacht, the actual killer of Noisha, he sends her to live with Ogan for a year. Instead of a queen, she is now a slave and can be passed from one man to another without having any choice in the matter. Conchobar is frustrated that she does not understand the reality of her situation. Deirdre, however, has her own idea of her identity and her integrity. She has accepted to a certain extent her role as Conchobar's captive, but has spent her year with him in mourning Noisha. When it comes to being handed on to Ogan, however, we come up against her own personal geis. Like Fergus and like Noisha and his brothers, she has made a vow, in this case that two men alive in the world together would never have her. She will not, in other words, accept a definition of herself that is simply concerned with her as an object of male sexual desire. When Conchobar taunts her with this in barnyard terms, she kills herself in a sudden, startling, and public way. This is good, Deirdre, Conchobar said. Between me and Ogan, you're a sheep eyeing two rams. A big block of stone was in front of her. She let her head be driven against the stone and made a mass of fragments of it, and she was dead. Deirdre's death is tragic, but not romantic in the form it takes. As with the earlier characterization of Noisha and Conchobar as bulls and Deirdre as a heifer, the comparison here of Conchobar and Ogan as rams and Deirdre as a ewe is drawn not just from nature, but from farming. In the earlier case, the heifer, Deirdre, can reject the bull of the province, Conchobar, for a game young bull like Noisha. At the end, she is presented by Conchobar as a sheep eyeing two rams, but not because she is unable to decide which to mate with. She has now no choice at all. Deirdre's suicide in the face of such a dilemma is an understandable, albeit tragic, response. But there may be more significance to it than that. These are stories that are pre-Christian in content and origin, but are written down by Christian scribes decades and possibly even centuries after their composition. We therefore have to, on the one hand, be aware of the possibility of pre-Christian elements having been toned down, of gods and goddesses being ehumerized into heroic figures, and on the other hand, we also have to guard against seeing them everywhere. It's a temptation either way. So we should not look at these texts as coherent allegories of Celtic theology, but the possibility remains that there are traces of pre-Christian Celtic beliefs and rituals in them. We know relatively little about Celtic theology and ritual practice, but one feature that does recur in the literature, even into historical times, is the idea of the sovereignty of the land as a female figure whom the king, or the one destined to be king, marries or at least sleeps with. This sovereignty goddess appears sometimes ugly as a test to the hero, but becomes beautiful once he has accepted his destiny. So there's possibly traces of this in the Wife of Bath's tale, where he marries the ugly old woman and she becomes beautiful at night and then becomes beautiful permanently because he allows her sovereignty. It may reflect an actual ritual practice which is mentioned in early sources, in which the king is symbolically married to the land in the Banesh Rigi, or marriage of sovereignty, and their union ensures the fertility of the land. In this context, the possession of Deirdre, whose name derives from the Irish word for oak tree, which is a tree of great symbolic significance associated with mistletoe and druids and all that sort of thing, the position of Deirdre may have some echoes of a pre-Christian significance. Conchobar's determination to have her to himself, despite the risk foretold by Cathbad, would work as a metaphor for his ambition to be king. You may remember that he displaced Fergus as king, who in this story is the main opposition to Conchobar's seizing of Deirdre. Deirdre's choice of Neusha does not, as it might in other stories, confer the sovereignty of Ulster on him, because they choose to take themselves out of Ulster. She's not a sovereignty goddess as such, but as Proncius MacCana describes it, an adaptation in human terms of the archetypal goddess figure. So her vow that no two living men should have her at the same time then becomes symbolic. The sovereignty of the land cannot, by definition, belong to more than one person at a time. Conchobar's treacherous behavior towards Neusha and his brothers is a problem that the story does not really resolve. For a king's word to be broken is a serious matter, as the king rules by virtue of his fear flachamon, or truth of the ruler. If the king is illegitimate or unjust, the land will suffer, becoming barren and torn by strife, as happens when Dubhthach massacres the girls of Ulster. And although Conchobar's actions do not result in the loss of his kingship, they do lead to strife for Ulster, not only in the immediate battle, but also in the 16 years of raiding by Fergus and the other exiles, and in the events of the Táin itself. Okay, so was that a better pace today? And I still managed to finish before time, so okay, now I know where I'm going, where I am. All right, any questions today? Did anybody already familiar with the story of Deirdre? No. I'm surprised. I thought it was of all of the ones, I thought it would be the one that you'd have most likely to have heard of because of Yeats and Synge and the plays. Sorry, any questions? Yes?
It's probably not fair to pay enough attention. Newgrange.
Yes.
Belonged to which people? Was it below ground or was it above ground?
Newgrange is a Neolithic passage tomb, which was taken in Irish folklore and to be one of the hollow hills. So it would belong to the Tuatha Dé Danann. It is associated with the goddess of the Boyne, Boana, and actually it was even more associated with her son, Angus MacAndog, who was the son of Boana, the goddess of the Boyne, and Dagda, who's the sort of, it translates as the good god. He's the sort of, you can't do equivalencies, but he's one of the senior gods. He's, and he originally had had Bruna Boyne, had Newgrange, and he agrees to surrender it to his son for a year and a day. A day and a night. Sorry, a day and a night. And then when he comes back the next day and says, right, I have my house back, Angus says, no, a day and a night covers all times, because there's no time that's not day or night. So basically, again, he tricks him out of the ownership. So it's very much associated with the she. It's one of the more powerful strongholds. The Tuatha Dé Danann, that's their legend, yes. The Milesians displaced them. They fought, they were and it was sort of magical fights, and then they sort of had a treaty where the Milesians had to go back out 9 waves and then come ashore again, and then they got the top bit, and the Tuatha Dé Danann went underground.
And the underground ones, built Newgrange?
Yes. And they became the fairies and that. And actually, in later Irish folklore, people like Uisliu and Maeve become part of the She as well. So all these old heroes and that sort of move underground once they move into legends. So okay, anything else?
Are these structures empty?
You can go into Newgrange, and they've been excavated. I went into Newgrange when I was a student. It's a passage tomb, and what's particularly interesting about it is that at the midwinter solstice, the light comes in above there's a passage and there's a big stone with decoration, Celtic decoration on it, and the light comes in through a gap above the stone and lights up the chamber inside. So it's positioned in such a way, like, as with Stonehenge, astronomical positioning so that they can tell when the solstice is or whether it just happens by chance. But it is a phenomenon that's been noted. I believe that there were, now I'm just trying to remember, there were burials found there. Those have been presumably removed. I'm not sure whether they were urn burials. I think they were cremations rather than skeletons, but I'm not sufficiently up on the archaeology. Nowth has also been excavated. I haven't been inside that. It was still being excavated and not quite safe when I was there, but there's 3 of them in that area, Nowth, Dowth, and Newgrange. And these were, as I say, prehistoric burial mounds, presumably for people of high status, but there are multiple burials. There's several chambers inside.
So dead people lived in them?
Dead people lived in them, yes, so to speak. But the other world, the fairy otherworld, is also somewhat inclined to be the land of the dead as well. And this happens in Welsh literature too, where when Prehistoric goes has a arrangement with Anu, and Anuin is the king of the other world, but it's also the king of the dead. And you get this in medieval folklore, where the Orpheus and Eurydice story gets told in Middle English as Sir Orfeo, and instead of dying, she's snatched by the king of the fairies. And when Orfeo goes to rescue her, the people that have been taken by the fairies are people who've died suddenly or in unusual ways, and they're also there as they, as in the moment of their death. So the fairy world and the world of the dead overlap quite a bit. Yeah.
Is there some work too? There's some theories that are being pursued in Egypt and various other places as well. But burial mounds are not purpose-built. In other words, they were built for something else and taken over for that purpose later on.
Yes, it's hard to say. They certainly you do get burials that occur inside mounds that are built for other purposes. I would think, given all this bit with the solstice, that there probably was a sacred ceremonial purpose, and there's also the possibility that the burials weren't the reason for building the mound, but the people being buried were being sacrificed as well. There's always that sort of thing, that the burials are part of the consecration rather than the reason for the burying, because it's an awfully big project. You'd have to have someone really powerful and important to be getting that sort of thing, or that this is symbolic, that in a way they're burying their gods there, so to speak. That this is way, and the association of it with Celtic gods does suggest that there was a religious significance as well. But as I say, I'm not up on all that.
There's quite a lot of work being done on whether something that is built as a sacred space then becomes expropriated burial purposes for heroes for.
That's certainly a possibility, yes. And the two, you could have someone very powerful builds a sacred space during his lifetime with instructions that he then be buried there. So it all, yeah. Sorry, yes.
I have a sort of distant memory of when I was a child seeing these flat stones, horizontal stones, and they were Deirdre's bed. Have you?
Oh yes, yeah. More often you get that with Dermot and Gráinne's bed from the Finn McCool legend, because they sort of go. Deirdre's bed is possible. I would expect that to be in Scotland rather than Ireland, though. Dermot and Gráinne they ran away. Gráinne was married to Finn McCool, and they eloped, and he was pursuing them. So you get these little cromlechs, the little 2 stones and a capstone. Very often those are so-and-so's bed. In Brittany, they're Merlin and Vivian or Ninian or whoever whichever story you want. That's where Merlin is supposed to be in prison. So these are prehistoric structures that people have forgotten the original meaning of and are then imposing a story on. So you get it quite often. Now I saw a hand up behind. Yes.
Did I hear you correctly use the word urn in relation to the burial mound?
I don't know enough about it, but my point was whether it was cremation, burial, or inhumation of a skeleton. I'm not going to commit to urns at all.
It just caught my ear because I believe that was one form of burial used in Malaysia, for example.
It was certainly a form of burial that was used in prehistoric Europe as well, but I just don't know at what period and in what places sufficiently to commit to it. But yes, there are different types of burials worldwide, and cremation and then burying the ashes in an urn or pot or of some sort is one of the basic types that you get.
Yes, quite a lot of EU money has been spent on that whole excavation area in the Baldwin.
In where?
In the Baldwin.
Oh yes, yes. The Irish have been very, very clever about getting EU money. I mean, it's
Quite thoroughly.
yeah. Well, as I say, when I was at UCD in the 1980s, the professor of archaeology was running the dig at Knowth. I joined the Archaeology Society as an undergraduate. That's how I got to know these things. I didn't study it, but it was great fun going around and touring these various places. And it was, a lot of people that I knew were working in their summers on digs here and digs there, and getting on the dig at Knowth was apparently a major feather in your cap if you got to dig at Knowth. So, but yes, there's been a lot of work done, and as I say, I've had difficulty finding up-to-date archaeological material in South Africa about Ireland. So just not high on the radar here, which is a problem with the books as well. I know that a lot of you were struggling to find the text in advance, which is why I've done more synopsis of the stories than I would normally do, because a lot of these things just aren't available, which I think is a great pain, a great pity, because these are good stories. These are really fun stories. Okay, any other questions, points you want raised?
I'm just wondering if you could give us, put it up on the board or something, just the names, because I think most of us are unfamiliar with.
Oh, the names, yes, okay. Now, can I raise this thing? Matthew, is there a way of putting the screen up, and then if I can find a bit of chalk? Because the problem is with Irish names, as they say, they spell a name Melchizedek and they pronounce it John. They don't look like, they actually is phonetic spelling. It just